MLS Aces Podcast. This is your host, Tom Sweezy. We're back with another one of these quick team recaps heading into the 2023 season. Right now, we're talking FC Dallas, and no better to have joining me is Dan Crooke from Third Degree Burn. Dan, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking some time to talk with me about a little FC Dallas news.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk soccer, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right? It's the de-stressor at the end of the day. But let's talk Dallas, because I mean, they're in an interesting spot, and they're one of the teams that I'm heavily kind of focused on what they could possibly be in 2023. Because if we look back at 2022, finishing third in the Western Conference, and then obviously making a little bit of a run in the playoffs, losing to Austin in the conference semifinals, but Dallas was a very good team last year. And I mean, the losses so far this offseason, I would say outside of one person individual, haven't really been that great, if you ask me, they haven't been poor losses, if you ask me. Franco Jara, obviously the buyout of his contract, getting his contract off the books, I think was huge. Eddie Manjoma, obviously the legend Matt Hedges going to TFC. That's the one that I think hurts a little bit, but not anyone else outside of a few homegrowns and a few academy kids that I really think are major losses for Dallas heading into 2023. And then obviously the additions of a Sebastian Ibeagha, of an Amit Korka. I'm probably mispronounced his name, and I apologize, but obviously a few other homegrown signings as well. Let's start with the offseason, Dan. How do you kind of take the Dallas offseason as it is right now on January 24th?
It's pretty similar to every FC Dallas offseason. They're pretty keen on getting their business done late on. We've seen Sebastian Ibeagha come in early. With Matt Hedges leaving, that's a way to kind of bring a little bit of the experience lost from the guy who is the greatest player to pull on an FC Dallas jersey.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Hedges, he'd come off a broken hip, 32 years old, chasing over $1 million, wanted 3 guaranteed years. Kind of hard to kind of bet on. Ibeagha, a year younger, just come off an MLS Cup win. I got to speak to Seba recently, and the way he kind of talked about a different role at Dallas, it makes me wonder if maybe he is going to be the starting centre back in place of Hedges. We would like to see 5 centre backs alongside Nkosi Tafari, Jose Martinez, who probably going to be the other starter, and then you mentioned I think it's Korsa Krosak. I don't, Croatian names are always difficult. But you kind of want that 5th depth piece.
Yeah.
But we're kind of waiting to see. They've just brought in Giovanni Jesus from Brazil. He just arrived in Dallas yesterday.
Okay.
He'll be a right back. I think he can play a little bit of centre back, but I think he's gonna be the challenge to Emma Tuamase at right back. Really, I think the big thing, honestly, is Franco Jara's contract. He was kind of an awkward one.
Yeah.
The contract actually ran out in June, but that keeps the DP tag and everything kind of locked up, an international spot. So at the end of the season, Andre Zanota, the technical director, sat down and said, "Hey, you're kind of putting us in a bind here. If you want to go, we're gonna let you go anywhere you choose."
Yeah.
So he found a club back in Argentina. Guy was a consummate pro. Bit disappointing for a DP, quote unquote big name, but Jesus Ferreira credits him with his progression. Ricardo Pepi credited him with his progression. Alan Velasco absolutely worshipped the ground he walked on, really helped him adapt last year. A guy that you'd love to see, much like Hedges, actually, you'd love to see coaching at some point, but it'll be a big deal. We'll wait to see what they do with that DP spot, if if they do use it, if they get to summer with it still and try and add to the team. I think the narrative really is last year was such a surprise in the first season of a new coaching cycle. Where do they kind of go from there? They haven't made any massive additions to improve from, but they haven't really gone backwards either. But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the old saying is right: if you're not going forward, you're going backwards. So just kind of staying where they are is a little bit of a difficult position.
Yeah, I mean, that's the piece for Dallas that intrigues me, right? Because I guess maybe if you want to consider it a major addition, you get a full season of Sebastian Lletget instead of, you know, the second half of the season last year. So now you get that productivity in the midfield all season long, hopefully, you know, paired with Paxton Pomykal. He looked really good in the midfield. So maybe now that adds a little bit more for a full season long in the Dallas uniform. Obviously, now you said that open DP spot. To me, I look at that open DP and I'm thinking like a DP number 6, a Joao Paulo type from like up in Seattle. Is there a spot that you preferably would like to see this DP spot spent, whether it's now or in the summer?
I mean, I completely agree with you. A 6 is such a vital piece to the team. It's a little bit heartbreaking here to see Carlos Grace coming back into the league. He was kind of that piece for the team that did the double in 2016.
Yeah.
I think you've got 2 decent pieces there. You've got Facundo Quignon. I think he's 800 grand a year, so he's kind of the guy that you don't want to be on the bench, but you've also got Edwin Cerrillo, homegrown. I think he's in the last year of his current deal. He's kind of the next homegrown that's due to get the next deal. Last season, they really split time, but neither of them is a guy that's going to push you closer to MLS Cup at this point.
Yeah.
And that's it for Dallas.
I like Cerrillo a lot. I think he's a very good player, but I do agree with you. I don't think he, at this point in his career, he's still, you know, young, right? Like at this point, I don't think he's pushing Dallas to that next level, to above third in the Western Conference and competing with, you know, the likes of a Austin, an LAFC, whatever it may be. And I kind of lump Brandon Cervania in that as well. I like him a lot. I think he's a really good player, but at this point, just maybe not adding enough to that team. I don't know. What's your take, I guess, on the current homegrown situation with Dallas? Because it is a little bit of, I don't want to call it a dry spell, just because I guess Dallas has produced so many talented homegrowns over the years, but you're not seeing the overabundance of homegrown talent, I think, currently on the FC Dallas roster.
They've kind of hit a little bit of a wall. There was a decent sized gap in. You've had a couple of players that have gone to Europe. Justin Che's over there right now. Dante Seeley both on loan. Their future is a little unsure. Che's just got into the Hoffenheim first team, so good for him. Dante Seeley is a young PSV, and he hasn't exactly set the world on alight. Of course, guys going on loan to Europe, coming back to the US is kind of not an amazing look for them, so they'd rather kind of, you know, go off if they have that option. In terms of the next guys up, you just had Antonio Carrera, goalkeeper last year. The next one beyond him was Julian Eystone, another goalkeeper who was he was 6'6" when he was like 15 years old. Guys, ridiculous. Outfield players is a little bit difficult. They're, like they say, they've kind of hit a little bit of a wall. Waiting for the next kind of good class. It's going to be difficult, and especially when you look at guys like Brandon Cervania. I think this year's kind of make or break for him. Sorry, he's not made the progress you really want him to. When he has made progress, suddenly he picked up 2 red cards last season and put himself out of the team. Leget's come in, Siki and Sebeling came in out of the second round of the draft or the end of the first round, I can't remember which it was, but kind of came out of nowhere and has been a guy that has just really left Brandon expendable. Even on the, you've got a make or break here really for Paxton too. when he had his surgery after all the issues he'd had, he talked about the recovery being like an ACL, right? You have 2 years where you're healthy, but you're not really yourself.
Yeah.
This is year 3. This is where he wants to be himself. He said he wants to take charge of games. Getting into January camp is a big boost for him. It's going to be a little bit interesting for him because if you improve the eights at all, you're probably not dropping Leggett. You're probably dropping Paxton in that case.
Unfortunately, right now it looks like that. Even though I will say, like I said a little bit ago, like that tandem of Leggett and Pomykal at the end of last season, I thought played really well together. Like I liked those two a lot, and I think you saw towards the end of last season Paxton kind of coming back into his own, like we saw glimpses of prior to his major injury, right? Like I have higher hopes for him than I do other players on this roster, I guess, if we're gonna go into their make or break years for sure. But we kind of touched on the midfield, a little bit. We touched on the back line a little bit. Obviously, I think the stars of this roster do come in that attack, though, right? Of Alan Velasco on the one wing, Paul Arriola on the other wing, and Jesus Ferreira in the middle. I know that there was some rumors after the season that Ferreira had last year of him potentially being sold, and it looks like obviously he's here for the 2023 MLS season. Pairing him with MLS veteran of Paul Arriola, which we know we're going to get out of him. We're going to see, some of the best winger play of anyone in the league, really, out of Arriola. And then a Velasco, who I think maybe another year of MLS underneath his belt, he could take that a next major step forward as well. What has you excited about this front three for FC Dallas?
Exactly that, really. Just what it can become. We talk about Arriola as a vet. I mean, he's 28, 29, so he's right in that kind of peak age.
Yeah.
He's finally, I think, after a few years of kind of having some injury issues, last season he, went pretty healthy all year. Be great if he can roll that into the new season. Particularly, he seems to get a kick out playing with Jesus between national team and the and obviously playing for FC Dallas. I think a big narrative early on was Nico coming from coaching under Greg Berhalter with the national team, plays the same system, the same philosophy, everything. So Paul Arriola came in. He was kind of the ambassador of like, guys, this is the style we're playing. This is the style I've been playing with the national team for however long. Same with Jesus. Paxton Pomykal had been to a few camps. So, he, as a guy who'd been, in the lineup for so long, he was another one of those kind of leaders. So, there's a captain's armband about to float around his there as well. So it'd be great to see kind of who takes that on, and I guess who becomes the face of the team, really.
That's an interesting one. Do you have a guess on who you think gets the armband?
Jesus Ferreira seemed to be the backup. I'd love to see it on Paxton Pomykal personally.
I mean, I feel like you could see it on, right, like an academy guy like that, a Pomykal, a Ferreira. But I could, from what you're saying, I could also see like a Paul Arriola. Maybe, I don't know, it's too soon, but a Sebastian Leggett. He's been in the USMNT system as well. Maybe, I don't know. I'm spitballing ideas here.
No, I think you've got quite a few leaders on the team.
Yeah.
Even looking further back, you've got Marco Farfan so for such a young guy who hasn't had the most experience. That was a guy who was last season was just a leader out of the back and just earned every penny, every bit of risk from moving on from Ryan Hollinshead. And by the way, a move that really paid off massively for both teams.
Yes.
Bizarrely, when does that ever happen?
The final thing, Dan, that I want to ask you, and then I will let you get out of here, is we've obviously talked about the stars of this team. We've talked about maybe some of the guys who are in their make or break years. Is there someone that we haven't touched on enough, or is there someone who's maybe kind of sliding under the radar in the greater landscape of MLS coverage or Dallas coverage that you feel like in 2023 really, I don't know, could explode onto the scene, could really make an impact for the team, could anything like that?
I think nationally last year, the role that Martin Paz played in goal went pretty quiet. But as a guy 25, he'd played, I think, with the Dutch under 23s previously. Guy pulled off some incredible saves, had a decent record on penalties. If he progresses at the rate he did last year, he could be, one of those ones that a dark horse for the goalkeeper of the year award. I can't remember, Nick Romando one. Yeah. Likewise, Marco Farfan, if he continues the way he did last year, there is definitely a gap behind Jedi in the national team. I mean, he could sneak his way in there even, if he kind of keeps that up from someone who, Portland's first homegrown, maybe didn't live up to the expectation, went to LA, couldn't find his foot in. I think that'd be a really cool story just to kind of recover massively and, put yourself back into the national team picture that he was very briefly in.
I mean, I can agree with you, right? Like, I think both Martin Paz and Marco Farfan, like, they were two guys who bounced around a little bit. I know less about Paz's career prior to MLS before coming to Dallas, but especially with Farfan, it shows you, at least in my eyes, when you find yourself in the right situation, or you find a player that's in the right situation, the right club, the right just fit for them, things could just escalate from there in such a positive way. Farfan maybe finding his footing back into some type of idea of him being in the USMNT picture. Paz maybe, progressing his career, maybe getting back to Europe one day, potentially. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much to say when guys find a home, and it does speak just wonders about, I think, the club as well as FC Dallas.
Yeah, I think they've got a great environment. I guess the scary thing is how brittle that can be. Does Jesus cope with? He typically has had good season, bad season, good season, bad season. Does he carry it on into a second record-breaking season? Can Farfan's body start to break down a little bit towards the end of the year? A lot of coaches say, they want players to kind of suffer and play through the pain and learn to adapt. Can they get someone to take the load off him? Does he can he stay healthy into next season? Does Ibeagha translate? Does Emma Tumasi, take a step up as an attacking fullback? There's a lot of those little question marks of can they keep this up? Was last season just kind of the perfect storm where everything came together and they maybe performed above expectations, or is that the new norm? And is the maybe the Luchi Gonzalez 2021 season just a big blip?
Well, we will get answers to those question marks in just a few weeks. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on. Guys listening to this, watching this, Dan Crooke from Third Degree. Greatly appreciate your time, and obviously, I'm going to be following you guys over at Third Degree for your FC Dallas coverage for the entire season and beyond.
Hey, I mean, I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the previews and finding out, what teams we're going to look at in the next few weeks.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks a lot.
MLS Aces Podcast, we are back with another 2023 team preview today. This episode, right now, whatever it is, we're talking New York Red Bulls. And who else would I have on talking about the Red Bulls? I think it's your debut on the podcast, Bob. But Bob Ventimiglia, covering all things MLS from I-80 Sports. Obviously a Red Bull super fan as well. Bob, thank you for coming on, man.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So I want to obviously talk about 2023. It's a pretty, I think it's been a pretty quiet Red Bull offseason as of right now. I know
Until today, until about 2 hours ago.
We got a little bit of news dropping from Tom Bogert a little while ago, and we'll touch on that for sure. But quickly, I just want to look back into 2022. Obviously, pretty decent Red Bull year, right? Finishing fourth place, just behind NYCFC in the Eastern Conference, and I, had to toss that one in there for you.
Of course.
But we saw the Red Bulls have an early exit in the first round against FC Cincinnati, and in a very, very fun 2-1 game there overall. But let's talk about the offseason so far, because for the most part, like we said, been pretty quiet. Maybe an addition of Elias Manuel on a full-time deal, Corey Burke from the Philadelphia Union, you get Kyle Duncan back on a year-long loan. Not too many exits outside of obviously the big one of Aaron Long. Caden Clark officially gone. Starting with the offseason as of right now, obviously we'll get into things that aren't 100% confirmed as of yet, but as the offseason as of right now, what's your take on what the Red Bulls have done and kind of leading into the next year?
Good. So I think a lot of what happened in Red Bull land so far was expected. We knew Caden Clark was going to be gone at some point. He left, he came back, he left. So we weren't really counting on his play anyway. He hasn't contributed since he's been a Red Bull. So that really is a net even, I guess. We've had some, free transfers in and out from the academy. I guess Aaron Long is the big story. However, I would argue Aaron Long wasn't even the best center back on Red Bull last season. That would be Nayless if you watched how they play. And I think that's a great contract for LAFC now, but coming 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you're looking at an aging guy over 30 who's already had the injury history. So I think the outgoing players as of right now don't affect what you're going to see on the field very much. Like I said, Aaron Long is probably the only, I'm kind of like glancing up and down, the only starter from last year that we would have lost.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a lot of academy guys, a lot of other homegrown guys on the app that never really broke into the first team. No disrespect to them. They're not bad players. They're professional soccer players. They're better than me on the soccer field, but not a major loss to the Red Bull first team. And then obviously, what the Red Bulls do, they bring in that next homegrown core. They bring in those next super draft signees that played in their academy, the Peter Strouds that everyone's very excited about. I know David Goss from Extra Time is talking heavily about Peter Stroud, and there's a lot to be excited about him and his potential. But let's talk about what Tom Bogert dropped. And I mean, I'll let you take this if you want to talk about the Tommy Scoops drop of this morning.
Yeah, so this is actually a little surprising. Red Bull doesn't usually go out and spend a ton of money, but they got a nice young kid, Dante Venzier, 24 years old from Belgium, and this has been rumored. And usually when Red Bull do make a splash, when they do make a signing, it's not something that's leaked ahead of time. So this goes a little contrary to what normally happens. A guy played in Belgium, first division, in Union SG, played in Genk in the past. And I think if I'm reading this correctly, in his 4 or so pro seasons, 106 starts. He's played 98 90s, so like about 98 full games, 58 goals, 20 assists. And that is what Red Bulls has been missing for quite a few years now. And around Red Bull land, you have very negative fans, right? Like we finished last year 2 points out of third place, and you would have thought it was the worst season we ever had. If you talk to NYCFC fans, you probably had thought, okay, this was a pretty good season coming off MLS Cup, and we got a top playoff spot, a bye.
Yeah.
Everything is great in the world. Not in Red Bull land. This was, super negative. You would have thought this team missed the playoffs the way people were talking. And what we were really missing, 50 goals scored, 41 goals allowed, very timely attacking. Out of the center forward position, we only had, 10 total goals of those 50. What team do you know in Major League Soccer that has 20% of their goals coming from the center forward position and still making the playoffs? So Dante Venzier is going to get a chance. He's going to start right away. There's no one else holding that position. We have Manuel, Corey Burke, who joined in this offseason, but I think Venzier is going to fit the system the best. This is a system that requires forwards once they lose the ball to press, to get back and press right away. And that's not something everyone does. That's not a characteristic many attackers, even around the world, are going to, you're going to ask Lionel Messi to track back and track a guy. I'm sure he could do it. It's just not expected in every phase of play. But if you watch the way Red Bulls play, those attackers, when they turn over the ball, is probably more dangerous than when they have the ball at their feet, because they're going to look for the interception.
Yeah.
And we had Morgan, I think, led the team 15 goals last season, and it was based on plays like that. Him and Luquinas getting up the field in the wide position, really pressing the fullbacks, especially if a team's trying to play out the back. Not a strategy against this Red Bull team. They're turning the ball over. If we get a little production from the center forward position, if we had even 10 more goals from the center forward position, literally any production, this team could have been a top 2 team in the East.
So that's where I want to start, and you hit it on the head so far, right? In my opinion, like the Red Bulls, very strong 11 overall, right? I think the striker is just a position where you're lacking that productivity, and even without that, you guys are a good team. This would be the third striker addition of the offseason, like you said, behind Burke, Manuel on the full-time deal, adding to a roster that you have of a Tom Barlow, of a Patrick Klimala, who did come in on, for you guys, a pretty hefty transfer fee of its own right. Yeah. If this deal is official, it gets done, right? I always like to throw ifs until we see the official statements come through, because I'm neurotic like that. But do you see a Klimala, Barlow's probably the easier move, but do you see a move for a Klimala to be, I guess, happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Klimala, there's been rumors that people want him. And he's always just a touch away. Like you said, he just missed it. I like to make fun of people for saying unlucky. Mm-hmm. Like there's a physical rule of physics of why the ball didn't go in the net. It's because he missed the shot. So you can say unlucky all you want. Patrick Klimala is a player who is habitually unlucky. Amazing skill, great play on the ball. He goes down like a sack of potatoes anytime you touch him, but that's part of the play style. There is a market for Patrick Klimala. I don't think they're going to recoup all that money, but he is gone. He will not be on the starting roster. I'm very certain of that. And as far as Barlow goes, you can move him for a sack of balls. I don't care.
150K in GAM, some other team will take him. He'll lead their MLS Next Pro side. Then it'll be fine. I like Tom Barlow, but just with the current state of the roster, I don't think he's breaking in. So when
a rival likes your starting center forward, that's a good sign that he's not a good center forward.
Honestly, I'm not saying he's MLS starting quality, but I think Tom Barlow could be like a third striker on an MLS team, starting striker in a division below. That's just my
agreed
on Barlow. When I'm looking at this attack, you obviously mentioned Lewis Morgan, right? Like he was the team MVP last year. He is arguably the best player on the team. Coming from Miami, I think he wasn't used properly, and the Red Bulls are using him properly or used him properly last season.
Fair enough.
Obviously, you bring in a guy at striker who can score. You have Lewis Morgan in the attack. Does this mean you think we could see potentially 2 up front instead of the 3 up front for the Red Bulls, because you have brought in 2 other strikers, 3 strikers in total now? You have a Lewis Morgan. Do you think we could see a potential shift in the formation here?
Yeah, absolutely, and I really hope so. Lewis Morgan plays well out wide, and he plays it good in finding space in the transition. If we get 2 up top, that would, for me, push Luquinas to the, like a number 10 position.
Yeah.
And I think with a player that skilled, you want to get the ball at his feet as often as you can. And when he's out on left wing, that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. So I would love to see him get a chance to move more central. Again, we talk about the high pressing system, and because of that, it's not necessarily like a Matias Almeida man marking kind of thing, but you're going to get pulled out of position, and there's a lot of players who are going to have to adjust to that. So ideally, we're going to have 3 attackers who can swap position, overlap, do all that kind of work. And, with a 3-back system or a 5-back system, you have Tolkien, Duncan, who are going to make those overlapping runs too, to join in the fun there. So I'm not necessarily too concerned as much as a team that keeps their clear shape with what the starting lineup looks like on paper, because those guys are going to be up top. They're going to be flipping around and hopefully gelling another year of chemistry. The actual position on the lineup card is going to matter even less.
Well, let's steer away from the attack. And you mentioned one guy in the defense who I will say I love, and not as a bottom end MLS roster player, but as a dude who I think you could argue is the top left back in the league, John Tolkien. Obviously, a guy who has a bright future ahead of him, a future in Europe ahead of him. And I know, the Red Bull organization will keep that path strong for him. But John Tolkien, outside of having the best hair when he has the mullet in Major League Soccer, what does he bring from the left back position that really just impacts the game when you watch the Red Bulls play?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of work rate. He definitely fits the system very well. Yeah. He could taxi the ball up and down the field. Not necessarily the most skilled player with the ball at his feet, but he can find passing options. He can distribute the ball. He can do everything well. And at the Red Bull system right now, he's being asked to do exactly that. There's times where he gets caught a little bit upfield, but the fact that he can get up, distribute the ball, and get back better than most left backs. Now, left back is a position of weakness around the league, so take that with what you will. High work rate, high energy, fitness, just off the charts. And I think it's the hair. It's aerodynamic, something with the mullet.
Look, he's still young, right? So there's a lot of room for growth for him. And hopefully he was really good last year. Let's hope he takes the next step forward as well in 2023. The midfield. You mentioned Luquinhas a lot, right? We can say he's a very dynamic player on the ball. He kind of plays that 10. He can get forward, maybe as a second striker, whatever you want to consider him there. But the rest of that midfield, to me, that sits in front of that back line is so interesting because you have a Christian Caceres, you have a Frankie Amaya, Daniel Edelman, who blew up on the scene, a Peter Stroud, who we talked about before. What do you make of the rest of this midfield kind of structure?
So the midfield is the most interesting because this is where we're having the most rotation game in and game out. Ideally, if everything's working in the attack, those three guys are going to be up there every game.
Yeah.
Lock it in. The same for the center backs when Rice is going to be back from injury. Nalis is going to be there. In Dom, maybe there's another guy. There might be a little switch there. The midfield is really what was heavily rotated last year. Frankie Amaya and Caceres or Edelman are my top two. Amaya was fantastic when he played last season, but he kind of fell out of favor towards the end of the year. He was getting a little less minutes there. Caceres, I was reading on MLS.com, and I think some of those guys think Caceres might be on the way out. That may be true, but it kind of doesn't really matter. You can take Yearwood, plug him in there. That's your big body guy. He's kind of like the enforcer. He's got a crunching tackle, but kind of maybe a little more error prone on the ball. Maybe more of a true number 6. But you got all these guys: Estrella, Stroud. This is the audition core. The center of the midfield is where we audition new players. I don't know if that is based on a depth thing or if it's based on an intentional thing or just based on the players on the field. I don't know how this is going to go, but I do know you're going to find at least 2 double pairs of players that are going to work well together, and those players are going to connect. Frankie Amaya for me was clearly, one of the top players. At the beginning of the year, we had Morgan and Amaya, who were both brought in from other MLS teams, kind of left for waste, and contributed right away. They were killing it.
I'm kind of hearing in my brain the 4-2-2-2-2-2-2-2-2 is going to make its return, and I'm very excited about it. Potentially, we'll see. But my final question for you. Gerhard Struber, is this a make or break year for him as manager of the Red Bulls? To me, from the outside, it kind of feels like that, but what's the internal opinion on that?
No, it's absolutely not. Okay. We talked to sporting director Ali Curtis at a Red Bull jersey release event last year, and my buddy went and he was like talking, "Oh, Struber, that's like a DP right there. He's the greatest coach, best coach in the league." And we were just getting yeses, like, yes, of course, he's with this team for the long run, this and that. I think the faith is there. If you didn't ask the fans, if you ask people who actually know about soccer, he's had a great season. He's had 2 great seasons, 15 wins, 8 draws, 11 losses, 4th place. It wasn't all the doom and gloom you might listen to if you turn on any of the other Red Bull podcasts where, people are complaining on the message boards. They had a great team. I think Gerhard Struber is going to be here until he chooses to leave. In the immediate future.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, right? Like, I like him as a manager. I do think he does a good job. I think come the playoffs is when we see some question marks. But, I mean, he does a good job over the course of an MLS regular season. I like him. I've been at Red Bull 2 games and I've seen him in the stands, right? Like he does what you want your manager to do, take charge of the top down. So I like him. I think Red Bull fans maybe give him too much hate sometimes, but I can understand that. Last thing, and you go with this however you want to go with this. Is there anything that I may not have said, asked you, that we haven't talked about that would be important for non-Red Bull fans or Red Bull fans you feel like to know ahead of the 2023 season?
Yeah, the best player on the team. We haven't talked about him yet. Carlos Coronel, the Brazilian goalkeeper. I mean, he's been steady and covering in for, kind of a rotating goalkeeper situation since Luis Robles left. I mean, that was a club legend. And Carlos Coronel has outplayed many other goalies in this league. If you're looking for like a cheap fantasy soccer edition, Carlos Coronel, absolutely there. I mean, he's got a good defense in front of him. And when this Red Bull team is clicking and they're holding the ball in possession on offense, with the press, sometimes the best defense is the good defense. Sometimes the best defense is keep the ball out of his hands. I think Carlos Coronel is going to be another goalie that you're going to hear. He's going to be a name by the end of this season, and it's just by putting up amazing performances. He doesn't let easy goals get by, which, even sometimes when we had to lose Robles, there'd be like a trickler that, kind of got past him. What's going on here? Exceptional positioning, great distribution to the defenders back there, and absolutely the top player. I would say the most valuable player on this team.
Okay. I mean, look, I think he's a very good goalkeeper. Some mistakes last year, if you ask me, but I do think overall, when you look at the span of goalkeepers in the league, I think he's definitely in that top quarter, top 5, 6, 7 goalkeepers I think you can argue for in the league. But it gets messy with goalkeepers for sure. Bob Ventimiglia from I-80 Sports. Bob, thank you for coming on and talking Red Bulls with me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
MLS Aces Podcast. This is your host, Tom Sweezy. We are back with another quick team season preview. I still don't have a great name for it, but we're back talking SKC. And who else would I have on to talk SKC but Kevincho Lopez. Kevin, how are you, bro?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again. I'm excited. Can't wait for the new season. So we're getting close. So it's a lot of hype.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, look, your channel on YouTube, your reaction videos, they're all hype, right? So we got to get the energy, and that's why we're here talking SKC, because there is a lot of energy. There's a lot of positive vibes, I think, coming off 2022, where, you guys finished 12th in the Western Conference outside the playoffs, but you guys had a very nice run towards the end of the season with some of the key additions that you had at the end of last year. And I know we talked about that a little bit last time, but let's just start with so far how the offseason has gone, in your opinion. Some of the players out, and Uri Rosell and Nicholas Izimat Marine gone, veteran guys, expendable to some extent, but returning a Roger Espinoza, a Graham Zusi, and Andreu Fontas, some other guys from Europe coming in to fill out the roster. What's your take on the offseason so far?
Well, I think all sporting fans can agree that, we're excited how the season ended, but throughout the whole season, even when we turned it around, our defense was just lacking severely. And we had situations where, yes, guys got hurt, or we had a guy get suspended. So it was like, when this offseason, it's like, okay, we need a solid 6 or a good, center back, just a solid one. And then we had like 3 right backs or whatever at the same time come in. But yeah, with Uri going, I feel pretty confident with the guys we got. We got what's his name from? He played in Celta Vigo. What's his freaking name?
Celta Vigo. Well, I know you guys brought in Nemanja Radoja.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, he played at one point. And he looks pretty solid from what I saw and what all the sporting fans are talking about him. So that's going to be something to look forward to. But at the same time, this upcoming season, all right, let's say maybe we don't figure out our defense 100% yet, but we have like crazy firepower. Hopefully we get Alan back soon, and especially with Willie and Tommy and how Johnny was still playing. And I think there's a lot to look forward to this upcoming season.
I mean, for sure. And right, like defense, I think there's some question marks around it. We can definitely say that confidently. Hopefully, within the rest of this window, I know we only have about a week left and maybe some free agent moves. You guys can shore up another center back along the way somewhere. That's kind of where I would lean if I'm leaning anywhere with this SKC additions. But let's focus on the attack because Alan Pulido, obviously injured for most of the last season. He's coming back, hopefully relatively soon, but you still have a guy like a Willie Agada you brought in midseason, a Daniel Shalhoub, who I think is one of the best wingers that you can possibly ask for in Major League Soccer. Johnny Russell, who's a veteran but still doing the damn thing. What do you think, like, if you get in a healthy Alan Pulido, you still have a Willie Agada as part of the picture. Do you think that this SKC attack can be one of the best in Major League Soccer in 2023?
I think what everyone's been worried about is like, okay, we get everyone back at one point, let's say, and you got all these guys. Who do you put in? Who plays for who? And one thing that I think is going to benefit us is the team, especially how the coach plays, understands that no one will have a secure spot. So whoever's just looking good in training or maybe the game prior is going to be, favored that week or whatever. But and that's going to be the key thing. I don't know how Alan's going to fit because I feel like I haven't watched him. Like it's like dude's played 4 games or whatever. I'm like, okay, what is he actually going to play like? And obviously his quality, people from all over the world know who Alan is. So I'm hoping they mesh well, but then you got guys that, had to prove themselves last minute right after moving from Europe or Willie came from, I think he came from
Israel.
Israel, yeah. So those guys came in and they just started firing. So, you kind of maybe favor them, but I think it's going to be a really weird dance. And I'm hoping it's going to be like, okay, this guy's good this week, do this. Instead of everyone being confused, maybe some guys get a little selfish or upset. That's kind of like, that could happen. That could break down our season entirely. We're like, okay, but maybe we figured out our defense and now our offense doesn't even know how to play anymore. So I don't know. That's my kind of fear in the back of my mind, but I'm trying not to think about it.
No, I mean, I can understand that, right? Because Peter Vermees he seems like a culture guy. You have to kind of fit into his culture and what culture that SKC are creating and have created. And if you don't fit that, you're kind of gone relatively quick. And if you do, then you're sticking on this roster, right? I mean, we've seen guys for years in Espinoza, Azusi, Ventimiglia. I mean, those are the big 3, I think, right off the top. Yeah. But you see guys like that who stick around and Vermees continuously brings back because he trusts them. And I think some of these guys are going to have to prove it that they can be a part of that. They can fit into the system and kind of work as a team. And I mean, at the end of the day, a depth of talent isn't the worst thing in the world if everyone's okay with being a super sub 1 week, starting 1 week, whatever it may be. True. The midfield, right? Eric Tommy is a name that we've said a few times now. Came in mid-season last year and absolutely, I think, tore it up for SKC. Was easily one of the best players again with a Willie Agada. But now you get Tommy pairing with most likely coming back off injury, kind of similar with Pulido, Agadi Kinda, who he also came over from the Israeli league. So maybe SKC and Peter Vermees have that department down. But do you think that a guy like Gadi Kinda and a guy like Eric Tommy can fit together and work together well in midfield?
Like before we got Tommy, everyone was saying we don't have someone that fights back, like midfield roles where they need to like haul ass to go back or haul ass to go forward. We just had nothing, so it was a gap. Then we get Tommy, and he's actually hauling ass, fighting for every ball, and Gotti did that too. It's like we missed him, so now having both of them, that's another thing where I'm like, oh my god, that would be amazing. Like
just energy.
It's amazing energy. But again, it might not also fit. Like Tommy, at some points, it wasn't that he was selfish, but he liked to have the ball for that extra touch, and that might cause some issues. I'm just hoping that, especially with the leaders you already mentioned, like Zusi and Roger, this is like last dance for them in a way. So they might not be getting a lot of time or whatever, but that leadership role, if it might come into play when they're like, hey, suck it up. This is our last chance. Let's go. Pass the ball, please. So yeah, midfield, I feel pretty good about because last season, everyone talked about our defense, but at some points it looked like we had 3 people, in the opposing field box and then we had all of our defenders and just a gap in the midfield, and it just looked horrifically bad. But looks like now I think I don't think Gaddy. I think both Allen and Gaddy are not going to be like starting the first few weeks of the season. I think it's already hinted that, but so we can kind of see old last season crew again and then slowly put them in, which would be nice, instead of Peter going, all right, let's just have this brilliant lineup. Let's see what we got. I feel more nervous when we do that.
No, for sure, right? And I want to close things out in my final question here of, is there someone that we haven't mentioned yet that you are like really thinking like could have a breakout year for SKC, or could maybe be a major impact by the end of the year? Or it could be someone we've mentioned that we just want to give some extra love to, of course.
I think that is a good question. I think for me at first, when we lost, oh my God, his name is, he got suspended. Why can't I think of his stupid name right now? Defender.
Courtney Ford?
Yeah. So when we lost him, that's really when we started getting really shaky and didn't realize like, oh, Ford is so solid and he's such a solid player. And then I looked, even when I was re-uploading highlights and I'm looking at when he was playing, there wasn't a lot of talk about him, but the dude was making great tackles. He was always in the right spot. He was, again, super aggressive. That's the kind of guy where maybe he's not like the star, he's not scoring goals or whatever the case may be. He goes under the radar, but I think he's going to be very key, especially this season. I think now, again, we might not have guys that are fit or whatever the role, and he's going to be pretty solid for us if we can get him to play. The suspension was, in my opinion, iffy and kind of dumb, but rules are rules or whatever. But hopefully now we're clear to go, and he's back, and he could just play that role again, especially just looking at his size. Like, the dude is a monster.
He's huge.
Yes, he's a freak, that dude. So, like, just that presence. And we had, we had guys like Ben Sweat was one where, like, half of the season, everyone wanted to murder Ben, like, straight up. And then the other half, he was actually playing pretty well, doing great crosses.
Classic Ben Sweat.
Yeah, right. Yes. So that's another one. We're like, okay, just please be more consistent one way or the other, and we're gonna be all right. At least I'm not saying we're gonna be first, in our conference or whatever, but at least back to the playoffs. My God, not 12th again, please.
No, for sure. Look, I think 2023 is a year where SKC fans and the SKC organization wants to see them back in the playoffs, especially for potentially some of these guys' last ride. Again, we've mentioned the Emilias, the Zusis, the Espinosas. Kevin, where can the people follow you? Where can the people watch the reactions? Please let the world know.
So everything right now on YouTube and Twitter, it's just Kevincho TV. So Kevin CHO TV. And then TikTok, it's again Kevincho, but reacts. I think _reacts. And yeah, that's it. Everything I post, I usually am more alive on Twitter than anything else. But yeah, pretty much next day. If you don't watch the stream on YouTube, I'll upload it on Twitter.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me.